I think we're right to get going. Alistair or Claire, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to any new people that are joining us today. I'm Claire Spillman. I'm joining you from the lands of the Kulin Nation down here in Melbourne. I work at the Bureau of Meteorology. I'm a principal research scientist there and looking forward to getting into the presentation. I'll pass over to Alistair to kick us off, though, and introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hello from Nipaluna, Hobart. I work for CSIRO and I'm based in Hobart. In the previous briefings, the first one was almost 6 weeks ago, it was already showing up as being a warm year again this year. And so we recapped what that's looking like in Australia and what the climate drivers are doing in terms of raising those temperatures around our coastline. We also introduced the Sea Change Project, which is helping fishers and aquaculturists around around Australia get a better handle on long-term climate change. And so there's still, later in the briefing, when you watch this later, an opportunity to submit questions to Sea Change that are about longer climate change issues. And then we did a recap of last summer, which is summarised in this schematic on the right-hand side that showed that we experienced marine heatwave impacts at different times of the year around Australia, but they all had dramatic impacts. And so that was the biggest year of impacts Australia's ever experienced. From fish kills in the east and west coast, coral bleaching in the northeast and northwest, and a large algal bloom in South Australia that followed on from a marine heat wave. It's hard to do attribution in terms of what was the initiator of the algal bloom, but warm temperatures preceded it. 30 minutes ago, the Minister's office sent out this press release announcing that our long-range marine heatwave forecasts, which we've introduced in these briefings over the past 3 years, have now been made publicly available on the Bureau of Meteorology website. You've previously dialed in to hear from us every 6 weeks or so. Now you can go for free and get the information without hearing our voices whenever you like it. We're really proud of this. It's been the culmination of 4 years of research effort. On the next slide, please, Claire. 4 years of research effort, and this last final push to get them publicly available has been supported by DQ, CSIRO and FRDC and the Bureau to make them publicly available. I'd probably thought publishing a website should be pretty cheap and easy, but there's a whole bunch of security issues associated with putting any information through the Bureau's website, as you may follow in the media. And so this has been a real major achievement to get this up on the website and supported for the next 5 years. The forecasts look like the illustration on the left, and they're going to show you the future 4 months ahead of time. In these briefings, we've tended to concentrate on the first 3 months because we appear regularly with you. But you can now see 4 months ahead at this resolution or at a state-based resolution. And you can also see the skill maps that Claire will cover when we go further forward. So I'd just like to call out Jason Hartog and Grant Smith, who collaborate on this project with Claire and myself, but you don't see their faces as much on the briefing. But it's been a great team effort over the past 4 years, and we're super proud of getting to this stage. People's interest in marine heat waves as one example of these short-term extremes is definitely growing. And if you say, what's the situation today? There are now at least 4 different products that you could look at to see what's happening in marine heat waves around Australia. And we just introduced this slide to show you some of the differences that you might see in these products. They all use basically what is colloquially the Hobday definition. I wish I'd practiced how I was going to say that. A definition that says a heat wave is more than 5 days of the 10% of the warmest temperatures ever seen in a region for that time of year. And so the most common image is in the upper right-hand side, which comes from the International Marine Heatwave Tracker. That shows you the distribution of moderate and category 1 and 2 marine heat waves. Below that is a NOAA product, uses a slightly different satellite combination and also has level 1 and level 2 marine heat waves. If you squint your eyes and you could ignore the colours, they're kind of very similar in nature. Coming across to the 2 on the left-hand side, these are 2 different products. One that is the same on the top left as we kick off the forecast model with. So that's the reanalysis product that is most consistent with our forecasts. That would mean that if I had to pick one, I would say, look at that one when you look at the forecasts. You can again see in that image there a patch of marine heat waves off the east coast of Australia that's roughly the same shape running from the northwest down to the southeast as the shape in the marine heatwave tracker and in the NOAA product. And finally, there's a product that you can get from the IMOS website called the Ocean Current, which shows the percentile distribution of temperatures, again, which has a similar kind of east-west tilt on the east coast, but shows a bit more warming on the west coast than shows up in the other products. And then the table below, I just show the difference between those. They can differ on the length of time that's being averaged to produce it, from daily to weekly. The period of baseline temperatures that are used to calculate these anomalies also differs. Our recommendation has been about 30 years, but people's 30-year period slightly differs. They use slightly different data going into them. And in the last column, their resolution also differs a little bit. And so as we see greater interest in marine heat waves, I think more and more groups are going to make products like this. And so being able to pick a reliable one and decide which one you're going to go with will really help you interpret it. But when you see different ones coming up, this explainer, I hope, will help you sort through why they're a bit different. The other one we wanted to share with you is that the marine heat waves can occur at any time of year. And so you can have a marine heat wave in the winter or one in summer because it's calculated relative to the local temperature for that time of year. But if you're concerned about absolute thermal stress, this graph here shows you when are the absolute warmest temperatures occurring around Australia on average. And so for most of the east and south coast, February was our warmest month of the year. So a marine heat wave in February will mean higher thermal stress than a marine heat wave in winter. On the northwest coast of Australia, temperatures peak a little bit later in February and March, and in the monsoonal northern area of Australia, the peak temperatures are in December, so earliest of all. And so that's, I think, a nice picture to just remember when you're looking at forecasts, when might my critical period be if I'm worried about the absolute warmest temperatures? As you prepare for the upcoming summer, we've also encouraged you before to look back at previous years and remind yourself what they looked like. And so in the case of Tasmania, the current picture for what heat waves look like today is on the left-hand side. That equivalent 8th of December in 23-24, when there was a strong event of Tasmania, and in 2015-16 are shown in the middle in the right-hand plot. And for this time of year, you see conditions are actually much more benign than in those previous years that saw strong warming off Tasmania's coast. So I hope that's a good news story for Tasmania at the moment. It looks like the heating is backing off, and Claire will cover that more shortly. I do the same thing at the moment, looking at the forecast for Northern Australia. And in the next slide, it shows nothing. It doesn't show Northwest Australia, but I would suggest doing that same thing. Claire, please take over.
You will be doing that, Alistair, but later in the presentation.
Thank you.
So stay on the edge of your seats for that. Okay, so I'll run through the current conditions. Alistair's already shown us what's happening in Tassie, but we'll start with Australia as a whole, and also a bit of a recap on what's been going on in the last month or so. So these two plots are our regulars that we often show to give a good summary of what's happened in the last month. So this is for November. On this map here, this dark orange colour really stands out. Then there's a lot more of it than there was in the October briefing. This is the highest temperature on record for November. So you can see that basically picks up that that warming that Alistair was showing, that tilt, that piece across the east coast in those earlier plots. But from the Gulf all the way through to northern New South Wales, New Zealand, I'll get my geography right, it's warmest on record. This is very warm going into summer. So that's an important piece of info to keep in the back of your mind. When you're looking at the forecast, there's already heat in the system. This is just showing it at the surface, and we'll get into the water and subsurface later on. We're also seeing some average temperatures, which is nice for a change. We don't see this colour very often anymore on these maps. So around Tassie, Victoria and South Australia, conditions are around average for what we'd normally see in November. So that is good news. And also on the Northwest Shelf. It is warm off the southwest coast, so it's in the top 10%. So it's very much above average for November. And if we take all of that info and we look at basically this whole box here and put it in context for the last 120 years or so, this is us here. This is this past November, and it just by a whisker, it's second to what this time last year as a whole. So we're going to see that heat distributed differently than what we saw last November, but it's still really warm. So just keep that in mind as we step through the next few slides. This is a global picture. So Australia's climate and oceanography, or temperatures around the coastal area, are impacted by what's going on in the Pacific and what's happening in the Indian Ocean. So this is the sea surface temperature anomalies. So the top, this is satellite, so top few centimeters of the water. And what we're seeing, anywhere that's pink is warmer than normal, anywhere that's blue is cooler than normal. And if you've heard rumors of a La Nina being underway, you are right. And that's what we're seeing here in the Eastern Pacific. This blue or cooler water is a typical pattern you see when a La Nina is happening. What that means is then there's warm water here off the east coast of Australia, and you get more rain and more convection, and more rain. So that same pattern that showed up in the earlier plots we looked at, you can see this kind of stripe going on the diagonal from far north Queensland across the Tasman, is really quite warm, so up to 2 to 3 degrees warmer than normal. Cool waters around Tassie and Victoria, bit of warmth here off the southwest coast. So that gives our sort of global picture. If we zoom in just around Australia, same pattern here. So what we're seeing, a bit more detail, these little boxes here is the actual, when we were talking about resolution before, they're 25-kilometre boxes. And the colour that in each of those boxes is the average temperature of that 25K box. So you can see very warm anomalies in the Coral Sea. So we're up around 2, possibly 2.5 degrees in certain areas. This is for the first week of December. You can see cooler than normal or cooler than usual waters for this week down here in the south. And there is some warmth around here as well, the southwest coast. If you remember the last briefing, there was quite persistent warming down here off the southwest Cape, and that looks like it's still there. If we then look into the water, so now we're in the top 300 metres. On the shelf, that goes straight to the bottom. Off the shelf, top 300 metres, the average temperature. And the reason we look at that is to give you an idea. If it's just warm at the surface, if just warm in, say, the top few metres, you might get a tropical cyclone or a few windy days. It can mix that heat away. However, if you've got a very deep, source of heat below the surface, much harder for a windy day to move that heat away. So now, as we can see, particularly in the Coral Sea, it's very warm on the shelf around the reef here. So we've got anomalies up to 2.5 degrees, and also some other areas in the Coral Sea. Not the full extent of the Coral Sea. You can see if I flick back to the surface, all of it was warm at the surface, but there were definitely areas here that are warm at depth. There is some warmth at depth down here off southwest WA and a little off the northwest, but not the same kind of, not to the same degree as on the east coast. If we take that information and then just pull out the top 10% and see if we've got temperatures in exceeding that threshold, again, that same pattern shows up, that stripe. So Coral Sea and southern or central to southern GBR, Great Barrier Reef and Queensland, are in a moderate to strong marine heat wave. Across the Tasman to the top of the North Island in New Zealand, also very warm. That backs off, so New South Wales and Victoria are not indicating marine heat wave conditions at the moment. It moves much more further offshore as we go south. Few little spots around WA, but quite a long way offshore. But the main area showing up is this east coast. So how did recent forecasts perform? So Alistair and I talked to you at the end of October, I think it was the 24th or around that. And in that briefing, we talked about what the November forecasts were like. And so what we do, we always go back and have a bit of a look. Say, how did we go? Did we get it right? Were we warm enough or not? And then have a bit of a think about why that might be the case. So this was the forecast we showed in November. This is sea surface temperature anomalies. So again, red is warm, blue is cool. This is the forecast I showed that was issued on the 23rd of October. We picked up this very warm Coral Sea, parts of the Gulf and across the Kimberleys, and then warmth down here off New South Wales and off WA. If we look at what was observed, and as Alistair said, this is the our best guess of the ocean state, and that's what we start the model with. For November, we can see the model predicted these warm temperatures in the Coral Sea, parts of the heat stress down here off New South Wales, and this off the southwest coast of WA. We predicted warmer temperatures than we saw on the northwest shelf, and also in the Gulf as well, or maybe around Darwin. But for the most part, the model did a pretty good job of getting this heat stress, particularly down the east coast here and those other couple of warming locations. We then look at the marine heatwave forecast, which was still a trial product at that point, wasn't on the public web page. You can see we predicted marine heatwave conditions here off the Kimberleys, which we didn't see in reality, but we certainly saw marine heatwave conditions through the Gulf, as you can see here, this forecast at the top, observed at the bottom, and down the east coast here. We didn't get that there was going to be a strong marine heatwave, but bearing in mind that we're still talking about the top 10%. So once you start getting into it, I guess we can go into the detail on the different categories, but it's still highlighting it's very warm in the Coral Sea, even if we didn't get that it was quite a strong marine heat wave. So we're pretty happy that the model's done a good job for November. So let's have a look about what the forecasts say. We're going to look at December, or at least up until Christmas, and then January and February. Since we're already on the 12th, as you know, there's only however many days to Christmas. My kids keep reminding me. It's terrifying. So this is the outlook for December through to February. So we can see this blue, this cooler water out here in the Eastern Pacific, which is indicating La Nina conditions. There are lots of different criteria that the Bureau looks at to classify conditions as either an El Nino, a La Nina, or neutral. It's not just the ocean conditions, but it's certainly one of the key predictors. Also the IOD, or the Indian Ocean Dipole, if you happen to be working off the west coast here. So we can see this warm patch here is predicted to continue through for the next 3 months on average. The rest of the country, warmer than usual, but we're certainly not up in these high, above 1.2, 2 or 3 degrees. But there is warmth predicted to continue here. We talk a little bit more around ENSO, so that's whether it's La Nina or El Nino. There is a La Nina underway. So the models, the Bureau's model and the other models that we look at around the world are all indicating it will continue to early into the new year before returning to neutral. So the models are actually indicating it's going to end sooner than it typically does. So we'll be keeping a close eye on how those forecasts change as we go through to Christmas. On the right-hand side down here, these grey bars, if they're in the blue area, that model is indicating a La Nina. We're the top bar here. This is the Bureau's one here. And you can see for December, there's six of the models are indicating La Nina, and there's 3 here that are pretty close to that threshold, looking at the ocean indicators. When we get to January, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's still 3 there. The Bureau's close to that line, but not over it. So there's a few models could go either way in January. By February is really only one, and that's the French model that's indicating still a La Nina. The rest have backed right off. So quite a short-lived and weak event. The IOD, so the Indian Ocean Dipole, is currently negative. And though it's weakened a lot in the last couple of weeks, and the forecasts are indicating it'll return to neutral in December. This is very typical for the Indian Ocean Dipole. It usually wraps up going into Christmas with the start of the monsoon. And that's consistent with the other models that we look at the Bureau as well. We talk about tropical cyclones for those operating in the north. The Bureau used to have a statistical seasonal outlook, so that was based on what we'd seen in the past. With climate change and with warming oceans, that statistical outlook was proving less and less useful and relevant. So it's been retired. And so what there's a new page here that's got a lot of info for each of the regions. And so what we've been looking at is more on ocean temperatures. You need a warm ocean for cyclones to develop. And the warmer they are, the more likely there is to be severe tropical cyclones. Our model that we used in these briefings, where we're talking about marine heat waves and whatnot, Access S2, cannot predict tropical cyclones. It can predict the conditions that would lead to tropical cyclones, but it can't predict an actual event. That's a weather or synoptic event, and you can only predict them a few days out. So tropical cyclones, they're a bit of a double-edged sword, depending on where you're working and which ecosystem you're managing. So they can really decrease water temperatures. They can do it through mixing that heat down into the water column, a lot of rain and cloud cover, reducing that, the sunshine that's coming in and warming the waters. They also can be extremely destructive, as you know. So I would encourage everyone who's operating in a tropical cyclone area to just keep an eye on your local outlooks. There's 7-day forecasts. And there's also these two plots here are just showing the kind of patterns we get around Australia. So in the west, on average, there's about 6 cyclones during the season, which is November to April. The north, 2, and in the east, 3. But you can see over the last 20, hang on, how many years have we got? 45 years here. These are all the different categories. So from Cat 1 through to Cat 5 across Australia. And so you can see that number really varies. That can depend on the year and also the ocean temperatures as to how many cyclones we see. So we've got, that would be Yazi there in 2011. So it can vary from year to year. So be prepared, keep an eye on the 7-day forecasts. Looking to our rainfall and air temperature outlooks, again, rainfall, we've got a lot of, that brings cloud, cooler temperatures usually. Air temp, if you're operating in the coastal zone or very close to shore, those warm air temperatures are going to make a difference to the area you're operating in. So on the left, we've got rainfall. This is the chance of being above median. And you can see it's pretty low chance that we're going to have more rain than normal for most of the country. There's a small area up here in the far north of Queensland that's indicating a slightly increased chance, but for most of Australia, it's going to be drier than normal for the next 3 months, December to February. On the right-hand side, I feel like every time I present this map, it's red. This is air temperature during the day. The nighttime temperatures look very similar. It's pretty much red everywhere. There's a high chance that we're going to have a warmer December to February than the long-term average. Okay. All right, so let's get into the water. So the way I've set this up, because we're already into December, is for the next 2 weeks. So these forecasts here are for the 9th, so a couple of days ago, through to almost Christmas Eve. So on the top here and the bottom on the left, we've got our sea surface temperature anomalies. So whether it's warmer or cooler than what you'd normally expect for this fortnight. So with the new website, we've had to change our colour scheme that we use. So in the old one, we used this colour scheme. But the maps that I was showing you were red every single time because our colour bars didn't go high enough. So they now go up to 4 degrees. And there's a lot of effort in the Bureau at the moment to align all our different temperature products. We've got lots of different ones for the ocean, and they're all on different colour schemes, and it's really hard, even when you know what you're looking at, to go, well, that's red, that's pink, that's some other colour. Are they all saying the same thing? So this is the first step that we're taking to kind of align those. So when you're looking at pink, it means the same thing on all the different ocean maps. So this is our first one here. So if we look here, we can see warm on the in the Coral Sea for the next 2 weeks, up to around 0.8, up to 1.2 to 2 degrees. It's also warm on the Northwest Shelf, so up to 2 degrees warm in just this small area here, and parts of around northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. Cool around Tassie, pretty normal going around South Australia. It's slightly warm here through the Bight, but maybe up to 0.8 degrees warmer than normal. This warm patch here is hanging around at least for the next 2 weeks off the southwest coast. Reminding everyone down here, this little green map is how good the model is. So we look at 40 years of forecasts and we say, did it do a good job of predicting past conditions or not? If it's green, it's done a good job over the last 40 years in predicting the next 2 weeks from this time of year. So we've got pretty strong confidence in these forecasts. This bottom one here is down the 300 meters again. So on the shelf to the bottom, off the shelf, 300 meters. And you can see it is still warm down here in the Great Barrier Reef, right on this, along this Queensland margin here. We're up to anomalies up to 1.5 degrees warmer than you would expect. This is December, and as you remember from that plot that Alistair showed at the start, February is our hottest time of year, but we are going into summer. So that means the system's already primed, it's already warm, and so you will know best on the areas that you manage or where you fish as to what that will mean. But it is warm at depth. It's also warm here on the northwest shelf, underlying this area here, so meaning it's warm all the way to the bottom. On the right-hand side, top one is our marine heatwave likelihood. We run the model 99 times, and we look how many of those forecasts are in that top 10%. And that's what's coloured here. So southern GBR, high probability, 80 to 100% of those forecasts are indicating marine heatwave conditions for the next fortnight. Low chance here on the northwest shelf, so we're around 60 to 70%. Down here off the south coast, very high probability this is marine heatwave conditions down here, this little persistent warm area. And there's a chance through here, very close inshore on the Bight. Nothing around Tassie or around Victoria. We collapse all that information down to say, on average, does it look like a marine heatwave? And you can see those red areas pretty much line up to these yellow areas. So moderate marine heatwave condition here, a little bit in the Bight, some on the northwest shelf, and this little patch here. Nowhere near what this map looked like this time last year. There was a whole lot more yellow and a fair bit of orange on that map this time last year. So that is a good news story. There are patches where it is warm, but not to the same extent as what we were looking at. Stepping into January, pretty similar story. Coral Sea, still warm, and warm at depth, but not as warm as it was when we were looking in the next 2 weeks. Northwest Shelf, it is quite warm down here, so we're looking at up to 1.5 degrees on the shelf at depth and at the surface, and you can see that coming down the coast. Again, not as extreme as we saw last year, but it's still warm. So, and there are systems there that are still recovering from the last marine heat wave, so it's important to bear in mind what looking at going into this summer. Warm conditions just through the Bight, but again, some warmth at depth, but we're talking maybe 1 degree warmer than normal. So again, February is your hottest time of year here. On the right, looking at marine heat waves, still got a strong likelihood of marine heat wave conditions up here in the Coral Sea, and also off this sort of southern Queensland, northern New South Wales. 80 to 100% of the forecasts are saying marine heat wave conditions. So still need to keep an eye on what's happening there. And you can see that showing up as a large area of moderate marine heat wave here. Everywhere else is pretty patchy. There's a few little patches up here on the Kimberleys and Northwest Shelf. This little patch down here of Southwest WA is still hanging around. But everywhere else, it's a pretty low odds of marine heat wave conditions for January at this point in time. You can see down here in our model skill, a bit more white on this plot now. We're predicting further ahead. So the further out we go, the less certainty we have around our forecasts, and that's reflected here. So some of the Gulf's very hard to predict far in advance. It's monsoon going on, it's also shallow. And there's a few patchy areas here on the east coast which are to do with where the eddies are. But everywhere else has got reasonable skill around the coast. And lastly, for February, the Coral Sea has really started to back off for February. So it's still warmer than normal, still this pink colour, which looks a bit more benign than the bright red that we've been showing. And you can see marine heatwave likelihood has really backed off as well. So we're around 30 to 40% chance, not the 80 or 100 we were seeing in the earlier months. If we look down at depth, there's still persistent heat on the Northwest Shelf and along the Kimberleys here, up to a degree warmer than usual for the full extent of the water column. Nowhere else is really standing out. There's a couple of spots here on New South Wales, which could be big eddies that are here. This patch still in WA is still just hanging on over the summer. But if we look at the marine heatwave category, it's really backed off. So it doesn't look anything like February did this time last year. So there are a few patches offshore in the Coral Sea, a little bit here in the Bight, but everywhere else, at this point, based on our best knowledge, best observations in the forecast, pretty limited areas of marine heatwave conditions. So that is a good news. All right. So with that in mind, I'll pass on to Alistair, who will take us through response plans and reacting to or responding to forecasts.
Thanks, Claire. Over the last 2 years, you've heard it through this forum and others that a number of jurisdictions have developed, I'd call them government level response plans. Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, New South Wales. And in the last couple of weeks, New South Wales have also developed an industry response plan for abalone. A common element to all of these response plans shows that they could not only be done at a state level, they could also be done at a business or enterprise level. They have these common features. An early warning system. Where will you go to get information in really fast time, either through your own data that you collect off your vessels or your lease sites or your tourism sites or your conservation efforts? Or will you use websites like we're exposing you to through these briefings? If you think you're at risk, what does your risk assessment response look like? And again, each of these plans has examples of what that's like. If I'm running a business and I'm facing risks, then I probably will have some idea of how I'm going to respond to those risks in the case that they emerge. And that's codified in my management response. There'll be people who need to know about it. In the case of governments, that might mean briefing up to ministers who'll be responsible for enacting different policy changes. In a business, it might mean working out what you're going to do across your supply chain or with your customers. A final part of every response plan is having got through, in this case, say a warm summer in 24-25, how are you going to face these risks again in future? And I'd say that these state-based plans are a really good model for thinking about what you might do at an enterprise or a sectoral level. And as well as these national briefings, we're also providing information through a cascade of colleagues at the state and at the sectoral level. And so already over the last couple of months, these dark blue have been regional and sector briefings. The Western Australia Coral Group meets to think about what might be happening off the northwest coast. Western Australia, through Arani Chandrapavan, has a series of updates that are provided to industry members there. South Australia has established a range of committees that have been tracking and providing advice on the algal bloom that's just, ending in South Australia. Tasmania had a general summer briefing to prepare on the basis of forecasts showing that there might be a marine heat wave in Tasmania this summer. Unfortunately, that's backed right off in the last 4 weeks or so. New South Wales DPI have a email list chain that goes out to their end users and talks about a range of resources that you can look at that form part of an early warning system for New South Wales. And finally, Gabrumpa's pre-summer briefing was held in November, which looks at what the upcoming summer looks like on the reef. In February, Northern Australia will also hold a briefing to look at what might be particular risks or impacts in Northern Australia. So out of these national briefings, we've now got this incredible coverage around Australia that's providing information at resolution that Claire and I can't provide here. I really, again, a shout out to all of the colleagues that coordinated through the FRDC Extension Officer Network that provide all of this additional information. This one I presented earlier, it just said that if you were facing marine heat waves, one of the things to do early is to have a look at what baseline data has revealed to you in the past. And again, on the right-hand side, you can see what has happened in 2 strong summers of Tasmanian heat waves and what the current year is now looking like. So I think that's a great sign for Tasmania that they will face a less warm summer than we thought 6 weeks ago in terms of water temperature. Now I hope, Claire, we can see the Northern Australia one. Thank you very much. That shows, for example, on the right-hand side, 2 very strong bleaching years that had quite different Decembers. On the far right-hand side, the bleaching in the year 22-23 was already showing offshore warmth in the Coral Sea in December. in the year 23-24 in the middle, although bleaching occurred, December was looking pretty okay, except for the southern part of the reef, which was already showing warming. And the current year's situation is shown on the left-hand side, with much more, again, inshore warming in southern parts of the GBR, and suggesting that, bleaching risk would remain pretty high, I think, for the next couple of months. And the forecasts again showed we're going to see some strong conditions there. So knowing a bit more about your regional oceanography will help the north east of Australia prepare. In the case that an event has been forecasted, we try and talk through some of the examples of what you might do. So this is the preparation phase. And particularly, I want to give a shout out to Tasmania that was looking like it was facing a strong period of heat waves at the first briefing in October. They got into action. And on the next slide, Claire, I hope this is the one I'm waiting for, said they initiated through the leadership of NRE and coordinated by Jacob Fries and Millie Crockett, preparedness workshops. I think these were the first ones that were done in Australia ahead of marine heat wave risk. And so they got together stakeholders and policymakers and managers for finfish aquaculture, shellfish aquaculture, and wild fisheries, and had discussions over a half day or so, that then resulted in a series of discussion documents that I've blurred out on the right-hand side. And I hope if you're interested in learning more about that, you'll get in touch with Jacob or Millie. But it was, to me, a really great example of taking a response plan, which says we're going to do something about it, through to thinking about what would be the real tactical decisions that you might want to be ready for in each of those three sectors. I hope that effort will not be considered wasted if Tasmania doesn't experience marine heat waves this summer, because they've put them in a great preparedness place for dealing with these things in future. We will wrap up by saying, keep an eye on the forecast over the summer. We're really pleased that the tool's available. And in this series of slides here, you can see that on the website now, you can drill in and get pictures that are for particular regions around Australia and see things in much more resolution. There are also views of some of the offshore islands, Northwest Australia, Cocos and Christmas Island. We're still not covering down to Heard and McDonald Island for the subantarctic fisheries, and that remains work in progress, as does the depth forecasts for temperatures deeper in the ocean. And once again, this information gets distributed by Jamie and the team after each briefing, and supporting the regional flow of information are all of the FRDC extension officers. And again, thanks very much to them for both joining the call and being ready to work with a range of researchers around Australia to bring information to people who need to know about it for running their businesses or any kinds of marine activities. Thanks very much, Jamie.